Welcome back to Evie's Acres. I'm Evie, and in today's video, I'll share 5 more things I wish I knew before raising chickens. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and click the notification bell so that you can receive an alert as soon as future videos about this and related topics are posted. One thing I wish I knew before raising chickens is that they make so many different noises, so many different sounds. I posted a video recently to show several different sounds that chickens make. I read that some of these sounds even inspired sounds that were used for creatures in the original Star Wars trilogy. On a related note, when roosters start crowing, they sound horrible. It can take several weeks until they find their voice, and then it can sound quite beautiful or really annoying. We're fortunate to have an awesome rooster named Tyrone who has what I consider to be a classic quintessential crow. And although he can go a little overboard at times, I appreciate that he usually crows for a good reason. For example, one morning while returning home from my daily walk with my neighbor, we saw Tyrone standing on a chicken tractor crowing repeatedly. Once I arrived home, I looked down from where he stood to see that the door to that particular tractor was closed, and a few hens were inside. As soon as I opened the door to let them out, he stopped crowing and returned to the ground. A third thing that I wish I knew before raising chickens is the volume of manure. Okay, let's just call it what it is, poop. I will say that it is really a good idea to have some infrastructure in place before getting chickens to help minimize your exposure to the poop and to optimize the cleanup process. Chickens actually poop most of their waste out overnight while they're sleeping. They spend so much of their day just eating food, drinking water, scratching at the ground, eating grass, bugs, whatever. And it's usually at night when they're roosting and they're sleeping that most of their manure droppings come out. So if you have your infrastructure set up properly, you can really minimize your exposure to their poop and also make that cleanup process a lot smoother and go a lot quicker than if you don't have your infrastructure in place, which I'll talk about more about that towards the end. But one thing I want to mention is a fourth thing I wish I knew. I know a lot of people like to talk about the benefits of composted chicken manure in the garden, which is true. It's great. But one thing I don't see many people talk about is the fact that chickens can really be a menace in your garden. Chickens, they love to peck and scratch at the ground, as I've mentioned, which, again, that is great in terms of them finding and eating bugs and worms and other sources of protein. But when they have access to a garden area, especially one that is filled with some of their favorite treats, they will gladly help themselves and not really care if you actually intended to, save that particular tomato for canning or a pasta dish or something later on. Since moving to Tennessee, our chickens haven't had access to the garden area, thankfully. But when we lived in Florida, our hens loved tomatoes and cucumber. And I only got to know that because they would just, when they were allowed to free range in the backyard, that would be one of the first areas they would go to. They loved to access our raised beds there. However, the most destructive behavior from those hens was when they would spread out all of the pine mulch that I had around our blueberry bushes. So that was no fun. Now, getting back to infrastructure, that's the fifth thing that I really wish I knew before raising chickens. Infrastructure to me is everything. If you're thinking about getting chickens, then I strongly recommend that you build and or buy the structures that you need to house your chickens at every stage of life before you get the chickens. And I also recommend doing this with your maximum number of full-grown chickens in mind, plus some. For example, if you're starting off with 4 hens, but know that eventually you want to have 10, then prepare your structures for at least 12. I'm just saying. As I mentioned in a previous video, chicken math is real. Going into chicken keeping, I was aware of chicken coops and runs, and I was vaguely familiar with the concept of a chicken tractor, but I had no idea about the brooder and having an option for isolating a sick or an injured chicken. Those are structures that I just had never even really considered. I didn't think that that would be something I'd have to really take into account, but they're very useful and very helpful as your chickens move through the various stages. These structures don't need to be expensive, but they must provide enough space for the birds to move around, adequate separation between where they may have their food and water compared to where they will roost at night. It's also a good idea to have a space where they can play, particularly if they're not able to free range, because if your flock gets bored, they will begin to peck at each other well beyond the normal pecking order, and you don't want that to happen. It's also important to provide proper ventilation, and it's also a great idea to keep in mind the fact that you, as the chicken keeper, will need to have access to any and all parts of these areas where your chickens are kept. It's all about making sure that that infrastructure is able to support the health and well-being of your chickens, but also facilitate your ability to access them and their eggs, if you're raising them for eggs, as easily as possible. The most important thing is to ensure that the infrastructure is predator-proof. I mentioned in the last video that we lost a couple of our hens to predators, and that was in part due to not having adequate predator-proof means in place. In a future video, I'll talk a lot more about different ways that you can prevent predators from accessing your chickens, and some of which also are applicable when you allow your chickens to free range. Your chickens don't necessarily have to be confined in a run in order to remain safe from predators. But again, this is something I'll address in a bit more detail in a future video. That covers it for today's video. I thank you all so much for your patience. We're still recovering a little bit from jet lag from our trip to visit some extended family over in Germany over this past couple of weeks. So I really do appreciate your patience with me in terms of getting this video finalized and posted for you. I hope that you'll take the time to subscribe if you haven't already, like this video, and again, click that notification bell so that you can receive an alert whenever our next video is posted. Also, feel free to check out any of the links in the description for a variety of free resources that you can download and that talk a lot about chickens and ways that you can care for them to ensure their health as naturally as possible. All right, everyone, stay safe, be blessed, and until next time.